Thank you so much for that lovely introduction. It's not that often that people read your work very closely, so I really appreciate that. And thank you so much for the invitation. And I also want to thank my hosts. I was saying earlier that I've done a lot of curatorial work. It's incredibly difficult to curate a reading series, and you know, people don't always treat writers very well. So I really appreciate your hospitality and also just everything that you're doing here at this series. It's really exciting. So I have 3 books that are in various states of completion. It's funny, although Fond obviously was published in 2008, I still think about it as this huge box full. Yeah.
Can you speak more directly into the microphone?
Well, I can, yeah, sure, I can do that.
You seem not to be loud.
Well, usually I'm too loud. I'm usually shouting when
Can you do that then?
I can do that for you? Of course. Thank you very much.
That.
There, is that better for you, Rob?
Okay.
Now go back to sleep, Rob.
So what was I saying? Oh yeah, so I have 3 books in various states of completion. So although Fond is published, I still think about it as this box of manuscripts. And it literally is a box in my office. And I have actually never done a reading from Fond. I'm a little resistant to reading from the book. It took me a long time. I'm just, in fact, 2 years later, still figuring out how to read from the book. And not just because it's a highly visual text. There's a lot of reasons why it's difficult to read from. But whenever I read from it, I in fact always read from printed out paper. That's usually, in fact, all marked up and has all sorts of strange squiggles and lines and marginalia on it. And then I throw these into the box where the other parts of the book are. So I'm also working on a novel, which is, probably will, be in progress for many, many years too. And I'm not going to read from that tonight, but I will read from another work, which is tentatively called Field Notes, a Forensic. And it started as poetry. It's really more experimental prose, but I am not really that concerned, in fact, about genre either.
Labels?
Or labels, yeah. So I'll read a little bit from Fond first, and then I'll talk a bit more about the new project. Inscriptions, some anon, recovered often from transient surfaces. Translation of familiar marks, bruise, crease, temporary lines exposed on or despite covers, slip sheets, moving surfaces. The tendency to read into places, tracery of tides, scribbling of thaw lines, borrowed narratives. Case study 1. Found, as of the gain, iterability to tell this, the inevitable, how adept, how convenient, sententia for novelty dates a course back, living with structures, the annotator's fingers prying the cento, quotes. A holding pattern in the elliptical, to tell this so many ways, a shape to resist this, packing it all back, quotations, invention, no title, period, punctuation charts, excavations, and confessions, the lowly art of a scribbler. Slender ink remains, contingent punctuation, conserved for parting, unraveling, dismantling, this shelf disentanglement. Rehearse this in excess of familiar ramparts, depleting intentions, threads baroque. Slender ink forms, a holding pattern, found remains, contingent presence in the elliptical, as if punctuation, all we have to tell this. Again, iterability, conserved for undoing. So many ways to tell this, parting gives dissipation a shape. The inevitable unraveling, only part to resist this. How adept, dismantling, labeling, packing it all back, how convenient. This shelf of Sapphic Bartlett's quotations, sententia for disentanglement. No recourse, invention, no novelty. Rehearse this, name, period, title, period, dates. An excess of terminal punctuation charts a course back, familiar dwelling. Case study 2. Categories chafing, blistering taxonomies, no respect des fonds. No desire, no body, accretions burst every senses, boxes, entrapments, accession dates in lingua, dust-off imposed histories, domains, visible monuments, speaking, occupational sickness, asthmatic triggers. Forced amalgamation, a routine lost, no provenance, no accounting, a spinster, a fiction, a subject, ruses, a totality, in strata, fragments and spaces, accessions, found surfaces, parts, forced, dormant, colonizing fibers. Order maintains a self in labels, sterilized, forbidden stray, adopts rules, course, arrangement, plethora, archaeology, statements, items, series, selves, suffocating in knowledge, leaking placements, and anthrax in definable depth. Categories chafing, forced amalgamation, order maintains a good appearance, blistering taxonomies, a routine lost to self in labels, unites monikers, no respect des fonds, no provenance, sterilized, clandestine logic, no desire, no body, no accounting, forbidden entries, additions, accretions, birthed a spinster, stray, a servant, every senses, a fiction, a subject, adopts rules, course, rejecting boxes, entrapments, ruses, arrangements, descriptions, accession dates, a totality, plethora, solicits discursivity in lingua, in strata. Archaeologies, record enunciations, dust-off fragments, statements, possibilities imposed in spaces, items, series, repositories, carve out histories, accessions, found selves, suffocating, a priori, emergences, domains, visible surfaces, knowledge, leaking documents, monuments, speaking parts, forced placements, an inventory of occupational sickness. Homographic version, homophonic version, inverted and remapped. Repeated rituals, anaphora, homotaxes, homophone, homograph. Tear, tear, read, read, house, house. Annotation exasperates this weakness. A practiced cheat, deception is protean. How many words lost? Skip this consciousness of deplorable habits. Practice turning pages in silence. Impossible, so slight, the sound of bending fibers. What comes next? Case study 3. Familiar postures, routines, boundaries, the indiscernible loss in familiar, like that use of the word like that compulsion to repeat gestures, moments, bodies, sequence repeated, closing the difference, like that depleting desire for impermeable lines, like that some things routinely missed. Familiar, like that use of bodies, depleting postures, the word like, sequence, desire for routines, repeated impermeable boundaries, the like that closing, the lines, like that compulsion to difference, some things indiscernible, repeat gestures, routinely lost in familiar moments, like that missed. Lines rattling, ceasing became variant repetitions. Windows, dishes, a documentary, fraying ropes, assemblage, burning signs on tattered reams, hands gripped, flayed books tightly enough to turn surge, bare perils of past tense living, downstairs with scripts, forced heaping and floorboards, reminder of opposing drafts, what could have light patterns, been what was stashed to hold a repertoire where a continuous line, leaving nothing clanking, unreadable, disassembled. Intervals, all unrecoverable, strands of night-long lines, conflicting archivists chase down narrative archive emotion to stream over accounts and range over slips, thighs and rivulets, pieces, turning loose leaves up crevices into nouns, turning files, drafts, sleep lines, verbs, adjectival deeds, deceptive fading ruptures, lines, transcripts of signaling times, indecipherable contorted past inscriptions, postures stretching. So desperate, the fracture, sequence, sounding time turned back, no desire for endings, only chronic impatience with the present. So that's what I'll read from Bond. So this new project, people often wonder if I'm trained. I'm in my an academic, and my field is book history, and I spend a lot of time in archives. But I'm actually not trained as a historian or an archivist. My training is more in the social sciences, ironically, and I'm actually trained as an ethnographer, not as an archivist. So this new book started in 2004, 2005, and I was really interested in the extent to which over the past decade there's been a popularization of forensic discourses. So CSI is the most popular television show. You go into an airport, you can't buy any poetry, maybe some really bad poetry, but you probably can't buy any poetry, but you can buy Kathy Reich's novel. But we've also lived in the last decade through a period of many natural and human-made catastrophes. So forensics has seeped into our everyday life. People just know about forensic sciences. So I was interested in writing a book about this, and for a long time this book was called Forensic Vernacular. And but one of the things I discovered eventually is that the language I was working with from pop culture was just not that interesting. So I was working a lot with CSI scripts and with language from Kathy Reich's novels and sources like that. And the book wasn't working for me. Eventually, I also started writing a book that was very kind of cryptic and fragmented and experimental, and that wasn't working either, because of course forensics is a completely narrative-driven science. I mean, you go and you find all these parts, you do all this research in order to basically retell a story. So not only did the book sort of move from poetry into experimental prose, but it also eventually, I realized it was a series of field notes by a forensic anthropologist, and it became a text where I started to work through in the mid-1990s, when I was taking courses in qualitative research methods, and we were all talking about appropriation, but the idea of actually going and researching people and writing about them seemed just wasn't possible. So it's also a text, I think, where I'm working out my relationship to the field note genre. So what I'll read tonight, there's 3 forms in this book. There's some lyric poems. Some of the pages look like scripts, so I've actually taken the language, so it'll say like flash to or dissolve, but the directions, all of what you'll hear in those brackets, everything is taken from Levi-Strauss, who recently passed away. The other form in this book, probably I guess would be best described, they're sort of prose poems. So I'll read for about 10 minutes from this new manuscript, which will be published by Book Thug in 2010. One perfect autumn day, I attended 11 funerals. People lined the street awaiting loved ones with open graves. I stood behind a middle-aged man. If you cared, you wouldn't carry a thin blade between villages. Mustafa Stojan, a pseudonymic photograph of my dad who touched me on the shoulder. Wished I could give him 1,000 marks, some answers. Most people filled with foreignness, this weekly harvest of respects provided closure. I was filled with the bounty of a completed job. How did he die? Looked at my clipboard and answered. There are landmines in the nature of these injuries. I craft these freshly dug statements to investigate our consumption of fear, contemplate academics repatriating the impossibility of war, to console ourselves with bodies and coffins. I drove from village to village with my ethnic cleansing methodology. Several flatly told me that they had had extensive contact with soldiers in sneakers. The purpose of this text was dutifully transcribed with incomprehensible tear, force taken by the reader. Better off dilettante day tripping in another body's funeral and still hold a stick in your graduate seminar. An onlooker tells me in a language I do not speak, you do not see because you have units of analysis such as states. For those who had given us permission, obligation boiled to right for the exhumed, but decomposition has never been a picturesque rural village under thunder. Ethnographic frailties or the failing of field notes, trying ruminations troubling my informants, some other ill-powerful society. I felt a responsibility to revise my village, to get it right. They were really my best draw, unveiling their secrets. The conflicted piecing of voices, contexts, aristocratic clans, the women animals admitted to quotation marks. Academic mentors stress objectivity, authoritarian regimes control our patronizing indulgence, barbarian ignorance. The indignant, domineering, wryly amused recording of data. The voice here is clearly that, a form of implicit public shamanism. Being experimental with form, analysis, perspective, or interpretation of Society X was discouraged. Society X accepted there was a style of presentation within which I had to work. Their daily lives, a few days of vivid research. I would not impose my impressionistic desires on Society X's clear and hard material culture. Society X would not expect me to render them beautiful after a mudslide or bout of tribal warfare. But few initiates eat flesh or maintain control. Decidedly aberrant, carefully worded, and often embarrassing understanding, secular insights reveal secrets, mental illness, spirit loss. This study was meant to be haunted by esoteric knowledge, effaced cosmologies, threads warping already speaking local crowds. But life utterly sacred and freezing seeks her own canopy epistles. Naturally, also the exegesis of miracles. Return to meaning. My public outbursts damaged this quickly hustled field worker telling of village life, death, and her authority. Each text a calling for communal possession. And this next part I'll read is just one example of what the scripts sound like. Anthropologist whispering. This really happened, once smelling like dust up in rib cages. There'd been months of bodies, some laid out on cafeteria trays. Quick flash to armband made of human hair and mystical clarinet consisting of a small feathered gourd. It was strange. They were that tiny. Then the slip. It's calming to use epithets on occasion, but this time I wept, diminishing in the arms of an intern. The hardcore objectivist looked away. What a fucking nightmare. Unbelievably humiliating. After a full day, I go back to my room, reflect upon the wet tarmac in glistening Caseba, every peak. Core reason I decided to cram into that bus. Disembark to discover, breathe in this mood. Anticipation carpets short gasps. Tattered tarpaulins over some of the windows give the impression of stalled work. After a full day of rain, something ominous, the sun broke through foreboding. I was drawn to reflect off to the side of the wet tarmac under the drooping plantain leaves. This was the core reason I decided to go along the road. The mood was reflexive, upbeat, with a tinge of anticipation. Crammed into a single bus, a propaganda machine populated by authorities, one-dimensional misery. He unlatched my discipline. Was certain my presence was anchored in a type of fetishization or reconstruction of the exotic, the warm gust of backwardness. Against the wall, don't get me wrong, I hovered over his little bloodlust and book learning comment. Rich and varied, created this strong chain of events, from wall to community, wall to wall. Doves flapped around, pure and abstract, eliciting expressionism. The caretakers of the visiting anthropologist delivered 100 questions unlatched. The record shouldn't be academic theory. It's important to recognize the inner workings of the group, your colonial tinge, to integrate the unique understandings of the military, the way we view ecological knowledge. Applied work without theorizing. Anthropologists' public way of glossing over oversimplified pseudoscientific data. Some came forth from sacrament to puzzlement. Prior to dramatic arguments and killings, neighbors embraced, looked ethical. An IU could bridge a conversation, the abyss between. But there was a compelling disparity. He or she is not military, the faceless man labeled terrorism is. Discourse is couched in many ways. Political, religious persons orchestrated strategies, constructions of violence, containment, looking into dragon's eye antagonisms. Humanity was plagued by the generated perplexity of its actors. Order by means of competition is fierce, but there's a utopian element in genocide. The routine nature of having no face, that's perplexing. Bonding all of us, a desire to narrative capture the very essence of terror. A good burlesque satire or ethnography, whether it searches for redemption or catastrophe before our eyes, there are definitional problems. Style prefigures factual information. I felt impotent to stop this, in words lightly equipped. Grew deeply distressed, unanswerable, glorified, dehumanized. It was impossible to know ourselves and to carry on. Walking straight forward with buoyancy, my legs didn't tire coming here, but my hands hurt quickly. What breaks out of the cuff area, shoulders, thumbs, hyperextending postures, it's this desk work. Stretching case by case the flexion of notes, this index flipping the memory into different lived moments, the giving up, resentment, checkpoints where I grasped myself again. Fieldwork necessarily includes failures and reconstruction, also excessive pleasures, confusion. Today it was the expression of an absent field. The women gave me means, not memories or dates, lower bodies vis-a-vis shoulders, memories vis-a-vis hips, a network of palms, the inner surfaces of fingers. Viscerally stepping beyond the sway of order, proprioceptive more than visual, I felt the weight of reading these patterns, monitoring forearms down roots, distal ends leading towards paths, the gravity of conduct, contact, a smile or gaze intricately twisted out from an upper torso, ephemeral cairns, unreadable, still in motion. I stretched to grasp these principles, the density of this telling of subjects, objects, selves, etc. Eyes looking, a learnable imitative act, objectivity buckles in the face of fallible, multivocal absences. Today I couldn't even monitor my own blinking. Loosely described, every step felt the length of this entry, a coil of conditions for winding in many dimensions, durations. A single and absorbing story made it possible to confront the bus terminal, tea house, half a mile away. But the real issue was the emptiness. Her painful legs refused to emerge. It was a question of a particular movement, a passage from analysis to terrifying hallucination, the pressure oozing out of her. Still nursing, she held up the head, her own singular sensation of pain. Ferociously archival proof of an event that left no other material, no dancing devils or spiteful stains, crazed figures with bracelets, rings, or intricate feather work. Acquiescence hides the rest. Combing documents, oral myths, Polaroids, dirt, toys, various circuits of memory between warm beer and food, she transmitted her separation in a large plastic bag, a tooth relic, broken tip. The body was no longer rememberable, what it had been before under the influence and over the obstructions, decisive unconscious complicities that mark the best of bodies. I came in time to surmount this, a compass of pale lines concluding cases. I knew she was not herself on the dance floor. One can be everything there, glimpse a body capable of escaping years. She came with a name attached, reenacting the paralysis of these events, a private theater of impressions. The end of space. How small the choreographed repetition of symptoms, periodic blindness, catharsis. Again, the act of finding ourselves in a passage, a memoir. Narrating led me to heads located at the edge of interpretation. Fingernails cut with traumatic precision. Airs. Poetic emptiness. The intangible center of identity breathes itself into my hands. Face alight, I register her performance. The real occasion of hard-edged anguish. I did not steal anyone's details, reputation, attributes. These last 3 days spent the night in an interior garden. Identical notebooks with maps of the site. Literary turn on my mind. I looked down on all of this from a single knoll. The white dome shrines, crenellated walls, abstract geometries, caravanserais baths, the sensation of distinct vocabularies. One would think that to end should be easy. You just stop. How inconceivable body of the town tumbling across these incised lines. This piece began full of stories crying out if not in clarity or poise and conclusions, but there was no general purpose, no documents, no argument. Commentary wasn't viable, not even these experimentations in genre. Thanks.